Democrats. Welcome, Democrats. We're so happy that you joined us tonight for the meeting of the Sangamon Valley Democratic Club. My name is Brody Hill. I serve as co-president, and co-president Rick Adler is also here tonight. Board member Cecilia Managa is here serving as our Zoom administrator. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just a few reminders about etiquette for Zoom meetings. Remember to stay muted. During the question and answer time, you may unmute yourself to ask a question, and please be respectful and courteous in chat. Well, tonight we have a great program. We have Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer Kahan. We have Congresswoman Katie Porter running for the Senate. And we have UC Berkeley Professor David Broockman, whose research should be very interesting because you don't usually see the words voter registration in academic research. And we have the two candidates who are running for the State Senate District 9, which is our area, Assembly Member Tim Grayson and Sangamon City Council Member Marisol Rubio. I recently heard Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer Kahan speak about all the legislation that was passed in the last session, and it was really amazing, well, especially since it was from her astute attorney's perspective. And we're grateful and happy that she's able to speak at our meeting. Rebecca, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys. It's so good to be with you again. Even if over Zoom, I miss the yummy dinners at the country club, so we're gonna have to do that again soon. But it's fun to see all of you. I think I've met everyone here, but for those I haven't met, so Rebecca Bauer Kahan, as you heard, I was sitting with my daughter doing homework before this. I have 3 kids. I have a 8th grader, a 6th grader, and a 4th grader. So I have 2 full-time jobs, your assembly member and mom. And it's really, I'm going on my 6th year in the assembly. Can you all believe it has been that long? I know. Time flies when you're having fun and saving the world. So it's been quite the ride. I don't think 6 years ago when we were fighting so hard to flip this district that we could have predicted half of what has come to pass in my time in the legislature. But every day brings a new challenge, and with it, the privilege to represent you guys in Sacramento. And so by way of background, as you heard from Brody, I'm an attorney. I practiced law for 7 years in San Francisco, and then I taught law school for 8 years before joining the state legislature. And then I ran for office, and that's where I'm going to pause and thank all of you, and especially Brody and Richard, who have really been leading the charge on this club for so long, for being so active and engaged, for having me here tonight, for all the speakers you're hosting tonight and in the future, because it really does bring the democratic process home in ways that are so critically important. Today I got to have Alice All Elementary from Pleasanton in the Capitol, and those 4th graders just remind me how much we need to do to protect our state and our country. And then actually later in the day, we were visited by Vice President Harris, who was there to really get us going and remind us how critical the next election is, and that really we have a binary choice between good and evil, and what our obligation is to ensure that that ends the right way. So a lot ahead of us, but it's really so fun to be in that work with all of you. So we have a question already. I love it. So when I joined the legislature, I was made the assistant speaker pro tem. I served in that role for 3 years, which meant I ran the assembly floor, which was really an amazing privilege. And then about 2 years ago, I became the chair of the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee. And for 2 years, I oversaw California's water. Just recently in December, I was given a new appointment, which is the head of our Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee, which means I will be overseeing all of our artificial intelligence regulation and sort of helping California lead the way in ensuring that we are balancing innovation with safe artificial intelligence regulation. So it is learning California's water, that was a challenge. I think artificial intelligence might be the next hardest thing to take on in the legislature and the country. So it's fun, it's constant learning, and I love it. So happy to answer any questions on that. But you heard a little bit about, Brody mentioned the bills that we worked on last year. I really continue to work in sort of the spaces that I've always talked about. the environmental space, we last year we succeeded after 2 years in passing a bill and getting it signed by the governor. He vetoed it the year before, that would save the bees. So a huge passion of mine is climate, and biodiversity is a huge part of that. And so we carried a bill 2 years in a row that dealt with neonicotinoids, which is the pesticide we know is leading the largest cause of bee collapse. And so we were able to pass legislation that will end the home use of that, which is really critical because we've actually done a good job of dealing with the way it's used in the agricultural space, but we continue to pour it all over our lawns and our golf courses and in suburban waterways, and it is killing the bees. So that was a really exciting win for us when that was signed into law. I worked really hard on water. Can't tell you that I had many victories in that space. It is very, very hard, but we really started a hard conversation about the future of water in California. I've been warned by the scientists that in just over 2 decades, we will have no more snow in the Sierras. That's how fast our climate is warming. That's a really frightening thing to tell you. For those of you that have been lifelong Californians, you know that the biggest source of water in California is snowmelt in the Sierras. And so as we lose that snowmelt, we really need to rethink water in California. And so I did 2 bills focused on that issue. One of which, and so that's really more in the climate resilience space, right? We're doing a lot to try to fight climate change, but we're also moving to think about climate resilience. How do we, as the climate changes, be prepared, and making sure our water system is intact and ready is really critical. So I moved 2 bills on that, neither of which made it to the governor's desk, but both of which are sitting in the Senate and we will continue to work on this year. One of which focuses on the hedge funds that are buying up California's water. You all read about the Colorado River issues between the 4 states that take water off the Colorado River. The largest landowner along the Colorado River in California is now a hedge fund who's buying that land to own the water in the Colorado River. They're also buying up farmland in the Central Valley for the underground water resources. We have a little bit more protection in California for our underground water than we do for the waters in our rivers and streams. And so we're really getting at this question of, is water a public good or not? Is it something hedge funds can come into the West and buy up and sell at market rate, which is what they're doing today? Or is it something that we should be protecting for the public good, since safe, affordable drinking water is something we all need to survive? And so we really took that issue head on. It's hard. It's a hard issue to take on. We're continuing to look at how to do that, but it's something that I'm committed to because I think it really is very dangerous for water to become the next gold rush in the West. And that is what is happening. And it's actually a fascinating issue because it is a bipartisan issue across the West. So in Colorado, Arizona, California, and Nevada, we're seeing this happen. And both Republicans and Democrats are coming together saying, this is a real foreign risk to our people. And so it's becoming one of the most bipartisan issues out there. And it's interesting that we're all looking to solve it. And then the other bill was really on enforcement of the use of water. We've noticed that, when things are tough and we don't have enough water, we ask people to conserve. We say to people with water rights, you can only use 60% of your water because that's all we got this year. And people are violating that. And we as a state do not have good enforcement mechanisms to make sure people are complying with those orders. And it's really critical that we don't have a tragedy of the commons, that we make sure that we're all playing by the same rules and that we have the ways to enforce that. So I did a bill giving us those enforcement tools. I thought it was going to be easy because who can say you shouldn't enforce the law? I wasn't changing the law. It's just saying that if you violated the law, we were going to do something to you. We're going to fine you. It was really hard. Nobody wants me to touch water. So we're continuing to work on that because I think enforcement is a critical piece of how we manage our water systems. So that's some of what we're doing in that space. As I mentioned, I'm now taking on AI. Last year, I introduced a bill that didn't make it, but we're reintroducing it, on automated decision tools. So these are the AI tools that have been around. A year ago when I started this, a year and a half ago, 50% of the decisions in your lives are being made by AI tools. Banking, hiring, healthcare, when you go into a hospital, what kind of treatment you're getting is now potentially being made by an AI tool. And we know that those tools have bias in them because AI tools, as you may have gathered at this point, are as good as the data that's fed into them. And so if you have a system like healthcare or hiring, where there are people, women, people of color who have been disadvantaged historically, it's being built into these AI tools and exacerbating and continuing those patterns of discrimination. And so we introduced a bill saying that before you used AI tools in those contexts, you had to test them for bias. And if you found bias, you had to fix it. I actually didn't think it was too much to ask, but we only were doing this for what we called consequential decisions. So again, lending, healthcare, housing, employment, the things that really affect you every day. And that bill had a challenge, and it was mostly fiscal. It's going to be expensive for the government to get the tools we need to enforce AI policy. And so we continue to work on that, but it's something I think is so critical and super exciting, because I think as a woman who worked in big law where women were absolutely the minority, and when I walked into an interview, I knew that there was bias against me. There's opportunity here, right? If we can build AI tools that have less bias than the human, there's opportunity actually to increase access to diverse pools of people in all of these sectors. So we're continuing to work on that and expand my work in II. I've already introduced a bill focused on protecting the likeness, the voice of people who here in California are such a huge part of our economy. You know, SAG-AFTRA, the actors, the voice actors, we had not protected their likeness after they died, because it used to be there would be no way to use their voice or likeness after they died. That is no longer true with AI. And so we're updating that law to protect their intellectual property even after they die, their likeness. Continue to work in gender equity. We're doing some more work on victims of sexual assault, training judges so that when they go and they testify in cases against their abusers, that the judge is able to handle that in a sensitive fashion, not what happens today. Often victims are re-traumatized when they go into a courtroom. So just looking across the spectrum at how we can continue to work on the values that each of us hold. We moved 3 pieces of legislation related to abortion rights last year. All were signed into law. That's something we're continuing to work on, looking at privacy. We're going to do a bill this year, which I'm really excited about. We had done a bill a few years ago for clinic safety for our patients and our providers of reproductive health clinics who are constantly being harassed. We're going to do an update to that and make that law a little bit stronger, which is really exciting, and look at other ways that we can protect access to abortion. So that's a little bit of what I'm working on, but I saw a question and there might be more, so I'm going to stop so that I have a minute or two to answer questions. Brody, you tell me when you want me to stop.
No, I mean,
Okay.
you can go on if you have anything, or should we go that you want to go to questions?
Sure, and I see the one in the chat. So for those that haven't read it, Raymond asks, has California changed the Constitution so that a recall of the governor puts the lieutenant governor in as a new governor instead of the vote for many random people? You know, we haven't. And I thought it was gonna happen. You know, was leading that charge was Senator Glazer, who's the elections chair in the Senate, was really looking at that. And I don't actually know why that was never moved. He and our elections chair were very gung-ho on reforming our recall, so it is much more just in the way it currently works. To your point, it doesn't really make a ton of sense that we would elect from the pool of random people on the ballot. I also think that, to be honest with you, a recall is a huge waste of taxpayer dollars, and it should be used in very limited circumstances because it costs us a lot of money and we could be doing a lot of good things with that money. And so we need to look at making the threshold meaningful. Like, fine, you can recall someone, but only if you meet a meaningful threshold that would require that, which I think today the threshold is too low. So that's my position. But no, that legislation hasn't moved. And I actually do not know why, but I'll look into it. Anyone else have questions? I see Lori. Lori, do your job and ask a gun violence question. Oh, Sheila. Hi.
Sheila, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
I want to call. You might all hear my 14-year-old who just got home.
Mom, can you make a plate again?
Yeah, talk to Dad. Dad's here. Sorry. Sally's enjoying that my kids just photobommed our presentation. Sheila's not able to unmute.
Okay. So
okay, you try. We'll go to Richard and we'll come back to you.
Yes, great to have you again. It was interesting. I was listening to the New Hampshire primary and they were talking about how somebody had an AI program that impersonated President Biden, and it sounded just like him, and it told people not to vote.
Yeah.
What kind of laws do we have that prevent something like that in California? I mean, do we have them now, or do we need to work on that soon to protect?
Right. So we do have laws that protect people's likeness. The question is, are they strong enough, right? And so, and elections are one of the places you're already seeing, I think the focus, people have asked me, I've done quite a few interviews now on artificial intelligence, and people have asked me, how are you going to approach this? And I think one of the approaches that is most critical here is, what is the harm that we understand today? Right? Let's not legislate some harm that we may think might happen in the future, but there's so much that is happening today we need to get our arms around. And election integrity, I think, is one of, for me, the top risks right now to our democracy, and AI is a huge threat as it relates to that. So our elections chair is actually looking at introducing a bill. And the problem is that she went into the press and she said, I'm going to introduce a bill that will ban all AI for election communications, right? That sounds great, right? You can't use AI if you're doing election communications. The problem is, right, is that AI has a lot of benefits. It also has a lot of risks. So you mentioned one of the risks. One of the benefits of AI is that we now, as candidates, can run our images, our videos, our pictures through a tool that Adobe has. And when we run it through that tool, it marks it. So that then if someone were to take a video that I put online and use it to create a deepfake, I can actually prove it's a deepfake using this Adobe technology. So it would ban that, right? Which is a positive use of AI in the election space, right? So we have to be really careful how we do this, because you don't want to ban the positive uses, right? That's a perfect example of something we really need to protect us, while also, you know, doing what is necessary. So it's going to be hard to craft this legislation, but I think it is really critical. And one of the things that we're looking at, and many legislators are looking at, is disclosures, right? So requiring that if you're putting an AI tool out there, you watermark it, you disclose. That technology is very, very young. And it's very easy right now, from what I understand, for it to be abused or to be faked. So we need, again, I mean, we're at the sort of early stages of this technology, and it's going to make our work incredibly hard. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We should do it, but it's going to be a challenge to really make sure we do it right and allow for the good applications, because there are many, and ban the bad ones. But there are some protections in California law around someone's likeness that, you know, hopefully would protect against that.
Thank you.
Which is, you may have seen Taylor Swift is looking at a lawsuit on what happened to her this weekend.
Yeah. I
Thanks,
see
Rebecca.
Sheila is unmuted. Sheila, what's your question?
Yes, sorry about that. Rebecca, you know how much I think you're terrific. However, I have an issue. And
Okay, tell me. I always say my husband won't agree with me 100% of the time, and neither will you.
I
So
understand that you are not ready to say yes to AB 83, the assembly bill that would outlaw foreign money in California elections. I also understand that your concern is constitutional. I will a lengthy article from Lawrence Tribe, a constitutional attorney that we all know, national, and professor of Jamie Raskin, who has proposed a bill in the House, which is identical to the California bill. And he is also a constitutional law professor. So with those two creds, I'll ask you, I think a lot of your answers will be there. Do you have any other concerns about AB 83?
So, you know, I mean, it's interesting. I'm the first to say that Citizens United, and look, I've run for office, so I think I have first, and I ran in the most expensive state legislative race in the state when I ran against Catherine Baker, with IEs up north of $1 million against me. So I understand dark money in politics personally. So let me just start there. And I can tell you that I think it is corrupting. I think then I got to Sacramento and I see what money does to the halls of power. I mean, the fact that we couldn't get a plastics bill passed for 5 years, I mean, my entire time, when it polls at 70% in California, shows you the power of big money in politics, right? So, you know, I think Citizens United was wrong. I think that that should not be the law of the land, but it is. And it is absolutely my obligation to, I mean, I take an oath that I will, you know, uphold the Constitution. And I have serious concerns that under the constitutional law as it stands today, which, you know, look, I hope we can put abortion protections back into the Constitution, right? I don't think the Constitution is static. I think that we should be doing things to move the Constitution forward. And I think Citizens United is one of those places. But for now, I think it's really critical that we not go sideways on the law. And one of the ways, and I will say this, and I think I've said it before, one of the really critical things about the way that money works now is that when you give us money, when you give money directly to a candidate, we have to report it. We have to report it fast. We have to say who it came from. We have to say when we got it, right? You can then look at my votes and you can be like, oh, she got money from so-and-so and did that, you know, right? There's so much accountability. There is zero accountability in the IEs, right? They can pour dark money. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know what people know. You don't know who's paying for it, right? And that, I think, is a bigger problem than giving money to us, right? Now, I think, could we get our money out of it and that would be better? Yes. But as it stands today, the money directly to candidates is actually better than the money in the IEs. And the more we close off money to candidates, the more it gets siphoned in the IEs. So I also think we need to be careful not to make the IEs more powerful than they are today, which is a lot of the campaign finance reform that comes forward in Sacramento is directed at direct donations to candidates, which, to be honest, although I don't think that that's working well either, it works better than the IEs, right? So there's just so much that goes into this that we need to think about to make sure our elections are working the way we want them to. And I think the dark money, dark corporate money, is where we need to go first. So I just have, Sally and I do not agree on this.
You want to go against this
That was
bill.
Excuse me,
Go
that was
ahead,
very
Rudy.
interesting, Rebecca. I think Nadine has her hand up. Nadine, do you have a question?
Oh, I've got a few of them. I guess, but I want to respond to your last answer. Am I to understand that because of current laws, you're not opposed to foreign money coming in?
So it's corporate money. It
Well,
is,
but
he's
it's
trying to
foreign
ban
if
it's
corporations
corporations
own it.
that have foreign owners.
Yeah, so you're not
I
opposed
do
to that.
not think that under Citizens United, you can limit the speech of corporations. That is my reading of Citizens United in that way. That is, you can disagree. And look, I know that many people on this call and dear friends on this call have talked to me about this. We're not going to agree 100% of the time. I want to make sure we make room for other things. My mind is made up on this bill, and we can talk about this another time. But it's, I think this is a place that is really, it is a space that is really complicated.
Okay, so my question originally, but thank you for that, if I may, through the
Yeah,
chair.
please. Yeah,
ask
yeah.
another one. Okay.
Yeah.
So the utilities tax that's going to come to the majority of households in California in, I think, June or July of this year, and it's $30 to $75 per household. And it's my understanding that that got passed through a trailer bill. And people have said, well, they didn't even know that that was in there, the trailer bill. So did you know it was in there?
So, yes, I did, because I read everything. So I did. My understanding was very different than what has come to pass. I never could have imagined that they would have gone, that they got, and this is, look, I should always assume the absolute worst with PG&E. I usually do, okay? But I didn't ever imagine the level. I mean, when you look at fixed rates across the country, you're looking at $15, $25 max, right? And we were at 10 actually at the time, just so everyone understands that we would allowed up to $10. They needed they came, and they were like, well, we think it needs to be a little more than 10. Again, the national average being $15 to $25. In SMUD, which is the utility in Sacramento, is at $25, for example, fixed rate. And then variable I'm going to try not to be too nerdy about electric rates right now, because you don't want me to go down the electric rate rabbit hole, and I've spent a lot of time on this issue. But and then variable rates above that, meaning you pay based on usage. So I actually understand, and I think that there is some rationale, and most states do it, have fixed charges and variable charges, because we have fixed costs in the system. I'm a solar owner, and yes, do I use the grid in ways that require fixed costs? Yes, right? You don't need to buy energy for me, but yes, I use in lines you need to maintain, and I should be paying some fixed charge. And then usage should be on top of those fixed charges. What they came to the PUC with was obscene. The PUC has now become an entity that it appears just rubber stamps whatever PG&E wants, and that's a huge problem. I'm actually going to be introducing a bill focused on PUC reform, because I think that the PUC is corrupted at this point. But we did not anticipate, even those of us that knew it was in the bill, did not anticipate that it would even be on the radar possibility that they would be looking at fixed rates as high as they are. And so we are actually going to reintroduce a cap and try to fix it. To be totally honest with you, it was a mistake on our part, and we're going to try to fix it.
And just one more, so what, and you're thinking of like a $10 cap?
Well, the cap was $10. So before the bill, and most people don't know this, the IUUs could have gone to the PUC and asked for $10. Some had, like I said, but PG&E and some of the other big ones had not. I think we're toying with 15. But I mean, again, the national average is 15 to 25.
Thank you.
And it would bring, I mean, the theory of that also is then you wouldn't pay, right now, those fixed costs are built into your variable, into what you pay per kilowatt hour, that would come out of your kilowatt hours, right? So it should then drive down the cost of your kilowatt hours, but you know, we have some costs that don't depend on how much energy you use, right? So that's the logic. And I think that logic makes sense as long as we're at a reasonable cost, which is not currently the case in their proposals. I saw a question in the chat about mental health for youth, and I just want to touch on that because I think it is, you know, you heard my teenager off screen. I have, you know, 2 middle schoolers, so I get to live sort of the youth life right now. And I do think that it is something that we have to remember every day in the Capitol. It is so, so important. And, you know, we did the 988 bill. I'm sitting on the working group that is rolling out the 988 system in California to really be a comprehensive crisis response system. Elaine's going to go make that a reality in Contra Costa. God bless her. And, you know, so that is, I've done that, right? So what do we do next? And I really do want to touch on the mental health bond, which will be on the ballot. Really critical. That is part of, we are missing the infrastructure to support people with mental health needs. That is youth, that is adults, it is everybody in the system. And so we are putting a bond on the ballot to pay for the infrastructure to support the people who need it. And we need you to step up and do that. You get to vote on that. But what more can we do? And I think the thing I'm really looking at right now is what do we do in our schools? And we're looking at what is the best in class education that people are getting when they need mental health needs, and why isn't that for everybody? And I think that's something we really need to look at in our schools, because we have these students. I mean, you look at those statistics coming out of Washington, D.C., you know, that 1 in 5 teens today are thinking about suicide. And we might as well just be addressing everybody and making sure they have the tools they need. So yes, so important. Thank you for raising it. Raymond.
Oh, I was going to comment that there are now 2 entries in chat related to that. One was mine.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Someone mentioned that, you know, we're asking about mental health for children, and
Yeah.
AB 665 is something that was passed, which is minors' access to mental health.
Yeah.
This is already passed. And when I was canvassing, a person who said she was leaning to vote Republican, which was disappointing, quoted that as one of the reasons. She said it's now legal for an intern who's not even a certified psychologist, in consultation with your 14 or 15-year-old, to take the child away from a parent without the parent's input. And I thought, oh, what a bunch of malarkey. And then I read it. It's actually in the bill. It's, you know, there's a sentence or two buried in that thing that says exactly that. And now the Republicans are sinking their teeth into that to attack Democrats. So I was very disappointed. I'd never heard of it, but I sure was shocked when I read it.
I will take a look. That does not sound right. So we will definitely take a look at that. Elaine, can you take note of that AB 665? Thank you.
Yeah,
This is what staff
that's
is amazing.
unusual. That an intern could do it. I could see medical doctor, but not necessarily an intern.
Well, when I read it, what I was thinking is the converse of that, which is there may be so many children who need help that they have to get people interacting with them who are not certified psychologists. But and I'm okay with that too, but then it should not be up to an intern or some unqualified person to make the decision to take a child from a parent. And that seems like that was just
that doesn't sound right. So we'll take a look at it. I agree,
yeah.
Raymond.
And one last little noise. There is a group, and I have less hope for them than Nikki Haley defeating Trump, called Move to Amend.
Don't hope, Raymond.
There's this thing called movetoamend.org, and their goal is to not only overturn Citizens United, but overturn Buckley versus Vallejo from the days of Clinton that said money is free speech, so billionaires can buy elections and politicians. And that was the beginning of the end for
Right.
voters winning things.
Right.
So,
No, right. 'Cause it's the combination, right? It was free speech.
right.
And then once corporations or people,
Right.
all bets were off.
That
Yeah.
combination is the killer.
Yeah.
So anyway, there is a group. I've heard them talk. They sound great, and God bless them. And they'll win right after Nikki Haley defeats Trump.
Right.
Yes.
And I mean, look, one of the things that was brought to me was, maybe this is a strategy to overturn Citizens United. I mean, I was an impact litigator, right? So like, I believe we have to challenge laws we don't agree with, and we should take that to the Supreme Court. And P.S., that's how they overturned Roe v. Wade, right? So we need to play this, we need to do the same thing on the other side, right? We need to be doing that on abortion and on voting rights and the things that matter most to us. And we may have a role in that as a legislature, but that's that plan needs to be very well thought out. When you do something like that, you do it with the strategy prepared of what you're doing and who's representing and what state should it be done in and what is the circuit it's in. And, so I'm not opposed to the idea of trying to challenge the status quo, but I just want to do it in a very thoughtful way.
Right. Well, anyway, Move to Amend wants to change the Constitution, and that's God bless them. God bless them. But don't
Women
listen
still
to
haven't
me.
gotten equal rights. So
Right. Don't listen to me. I'm too negative. Don't listen to me. Listen to someone optimistic. Listen to
this has been with Move to Amend for many years.
yeah. So listen to Brody.
Stephanie Tadeo has a question in chat about SB 770 single payer.
let me open the chat. Sorry, I closed it because I can't see you guys, and then I
Can
reopen it.
you
Hold
tell
on.
us about SB 770 single payer?
Was that?
I think, is it going to come back? Is there?
Was that? I can't. There were so many bills related to single payer. I apologize, Stephanie. Do you know who the author of that was? There was a Wiener bill. There was a Shava bill. There was.
I don't know. It's according to reading here. It was signed into law by Governor Newsom in September.
So that must have been the Scott Wiener bill, I think.
Okay.
There was a Pilar Schiavo, or maybe Pilar Schiavo was working on the Wiener bill. So Scott Wiener had a bill that I supported, focused on figuring out sort of the ultimate problem and question around single payer healthcare. Is next week. You guys should ask Congressman Swallow about this, because it is very straightforward how Congress would do it, because they can mint money and they control all of our healthcare reimbursements. We as a state are dependent on waivers to do certain things as it relates to our healthcare system. Part of how we would do single payer is through getting waivers. Trump would never have given us those waivers. And if Trump were to win again, he would pull those waivers away from us. If we were to do that, our entire healthcare system would collapse, right? So we have to figure out how to pay for it, right? I mean, it is the entire cost of the budget of the state of California. So this really says, okay, how do we do this? Are the waivers possible? How do we get the waivers? How do we pay for it? And it really starts to study it in a much more in-depth way to allow us to figure out if there is a path forward in California to do it as a state. But clearly the path is there for Washington if they want to do it. So I would push our Congress people.
Right. Yeah. Melanie Seaton, do you have a question? Real quick.
Yes, thank you. It is a quick question, and it's going to come from left field. I have a problem, or I would like to suggest to you as an assembly person that in the state of California, fireworks should be illegal everywhere. I don't believe there's such a thing as a legal firework in a citizen's hand. And I live in Contra Costa County. I worked for the county for 39 years. We border Alameda County.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. We border Alameda County, where I don't even want to use the word legal, they're sold to benefit youth groups. But then we have fires and our citizens, our lives are at risk, and our citizens incur property damage. Our firefighters are used. So whenever I talk to assembly members, I ask them, can't we make them illegal everywhere in California? And if they are purchased in another county, in the county where the damage is done or the resources are used, charge it back to that county.
Okay, well, so that's fast. I thought they were illegal in all of California. So this is how well I know, Melanie. So I'm glad you told me, because my brother and I went to visit my sister in Wisconsin, where everything's green and you can put out fireworks with no problem over lakes. And we always go there because we would never do them in California. So yeah, I didn't know that. But thank you for pointing it out. We'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
And I do see that the Congresswoman is here, so I am going to wrap it up, but I will close by thanking all of you for everything you do. And hopefully she heard me say that we should do single parent Washington because California can't afford it. I think she did, but
I'm not the problem there. I'm not the public option
Congresswoman.
candidate. I'm the Medicare for All candidate. So
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Good to see you all.
Yeah. Good. So right now I would like to introduce our Congresswoman, Katie Porter, who's running for Senate. You know, you probably know her as her whiteboard, and she tries to keep corporations accountable. And I'll just give it to Katie. Thank you for being here.
great. Thank you so much, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you tonight. I flew up to San Francisco and back today and did TV. So I am definitely ready to put my pajamas on after I get finished talking with you. For those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet or talk with before, I'll tell you one of my favorite things ever written about me was written by the San Francisco Chronicle. And they said I am Congress's single mom and watchdog. And both of those things are true. I live in Irvine, where I'm raising 3 school-aged children. I'm the only single mother of school-aged kids in the United States Congress. And the second part about being a watchdog is also true. I drive a minivan and it has a vanity license plate, and it spells out OVRSITE. And it is really, really important for me to be reminded of the role of oversight in making sure that we don't just pass laws, but that laws happen in people's lives, because that's what we're actually trying to do. And oversight is about that. When we talk about cabinet secretaries, government officials, corporate CEOs, these are some of the most powerful people in America. And oversight is about holding them to account for you. And so it's not just about giving speeches, but it is about getting answers. It's not just about speaking truth to power, but it's about getting these powerful people to tell us the truth. So I am in congressional hearings. I have 5 minutes to do that with or without a whiteboard. So for example, in the early days of COVID-19, March of 2020, I went toe-to-toe with the Center for Disease Control Director, Robert Redfield. The law allowed him to make COVID testing free. He waffled. He wouldn't commit. He said he needed time to operationalize, and I stuck with it and got him to promise and deliver free COVID testing for every single American, something that really changed the fight against COVID then, but continues to be a benefit to all of us now. And so that's really a concrete example, I think, of oversight delivering results for Californians. You may have also seen me question Chase Bank CEO Jamie Dimon, pushing him on, as a CEO, to think about how could his employees make ends meet or not, and really going line item through that employee's budget. He said that he would have to think about it. A couple weeks later, Bank of America went ahead and raised their wage for all tellers, their minimum wage for the whole bank, to $20, and that forced JP Morgan Chase then to follow suit. So it's no secret that I love whiteboards, but what I really want to talk with you about tonight is why I'm willing to wield that whiteboard. It's not the whiteboard that matters. It's that I hold these powerful people to account, which is, I think, the most important thing. And the reason I do that is because I have never been for sale. So we have several, I shouldn't say several, we have a couple terrific Democrats in this race. I think what makes me different is that I have never, ever taken corporate PAC money in any race ever. This is not something where I change my position because of a Senate race. This is really core to who I am and why I went to Washington. I also do not take federal lobbyist contributions, and I'm the only person in this race to refuse those. I do that because we deserve a leader who doesn't talk about democracy, but who acts to strengthen our democracy, who runs their campaigns in a way that give Americans and Californians confidence that we are going to fight for them. And so right now in the Senate, what we're seeing is corporate special interests huge corporations are really controlling a lot of the agenda of what Washington is doing, and they're focusing on solving problems for Wall Street, like these big corporate tax breaks that are in this tax package that Congress is about to consider, rather than solving California's biggest challenges, things like making housing more affordable for everyone, addressing climate change, investing in making sure we're going to have good, high-paying jobs here in the United States going forward. So I have only been in Congress for 5 years. In that time, I have survived an insurrection, a pandemic, 2 impeachments, a war in the Middle East. I've gotten a lot of experience in my 5 years, but I bring that fresh perspective. I want the Senate to have a representative democracy. I think multi-generational leadership is really, really important. Having the senior folks who have been there for a while, and having people who are newer to Washington to bring that fresh perspective. I've won 3 tough races in Orange County, as many of you know, and I've done that by being a very effective messenger for the Democratic Party, particularly on the economy. Every election cycle, the economy is the #1 issue that voters say they care about. But 94%, a recent study found, and in the last year, 94% of what Democrats talk about wasn't the economy or jobs or the working families or the middle class. So there is a need for Democrats to elect strong messengers on the economy that will help President Biden get elected, but that will also help us win down ballot and win the persuadable voters that we need to deliver the majority in the House of Representatives, and win these important local races. So we're not just electing a policy leader as our next senator, we're also electing a political leader. And I think that's something that makes me stand out in this race. I know how to engage the very voters that we need as Democrats to have a durable Democratic majority, because we're not going to solve problems like climate change in 2 years. We need to win, and we need to win again and again and again. And to do that, we need people who can engage younger voters, who can engage Latino voters, AAPI voters, and persuadable Republicans and swing voters, independents and no party preferences. That's how I've won in Orange County. I've managed to be a proud progressive Democrat who has been able to engage and bring all of those people together. So I'm excited for the chance to answer your questions. And I'm having a lot of fun listening and learning on the campaign trail. And so thank you very much for having me. And I'm excited to be in conversation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Let's see, I better go back to my gallery view.
No, I saw a couple pop up.
Do you want to read them, Rick, or do you want me to? From the chat?
Sure. I think the first one was that. I think that might have been for Rebecca. I'm not sure. We have one from Charles Hottinger in chat that says Lawrence Tribe writes that President Biden, by executive action, could divert 300 billion of Russian sovereign funds to use by Ukraine. Has there been any progress on that front? And I don't know if that's something that you would know about or not.
Yeah, so I think that I can't comment on exactly the legality of the executive branch doing that, although I have a lot of confidence in Professor Tribe. But I will say that I think one of the things that President Biden's trying to do that I do think is important is, look, when we're spending taxpayer dollars, especially big ticket items like helping to support Ukraine, it's important to do it, but it's also important to build the political consensus and the will, because we have already had to go back, and they've come back and asked again and again. And so I do support the president being creative and trying to find those resources and find those funds. But I also would like to see my colleagues on both sides of the aisle do the right thing and stand up for democracy and deliver on our diplomatic obligations as a NATO member, right? And so I think I'm open to exploring those kinds of tools, but I'm not giving up on getting the votes yet, because I really want to have that. I think it's important that we demonstrate to our foreign allies like Ukraine that we have the political will behind them, so that when we have a president who's not Joe Biden, which will hopefully be a long, long time from now, we have really laid that foundation. And I think too, with all of the authorizations of military force that we have seen put in place with some of the issues around accountability of foreign aid, I really do think it's ideal to have Congress do this work. But I'm also willing to say that if we can't get it over the finish line, we can't continue to leave Ukraine hanging.
No, thank you. We have a question from Ellis Goldberg in chat. It said, would you back a law that said corporate executives who knowingly endanger the safety, health, privacy, or the environment would be held criminally responsible? Boeing executives like opioid peddlers, marketing vaping to kids, those kind of things.
Yeah. So let me start at a high level here, which is that we need to reset the obligations of corporations. This idea that the only duty they owe is to their shareholders is wrong-headed. We give corporations tremendous benefits. We give them immunity from liability, limited liability. We give them tax benefits. We supply the workforce for them, the roads that they use, the infrastructure. And it is reasonable to expect corporations to then follow the rules and be ethical. A lot of corporate law and the rules around corporate liability are state run, and what it has state laws, and what it has done is a race to the bottom, with states like Delaware and South Dakota trying to attract those corporations. And that has been, I think, a real issue. So I think at the very top line, we have to really ask ourselves, what is the purpose of the corporate form? It's supposed to create a strong and healthy economy. It's not supposed to, for example, poison people with fentanyl and opioid addiction. It is not supposed to pollute and then walk away from your mess. And there's too much of that going on in general. I also think we have a problem with holding corporations accountable in Congress. And I have seen it time and time again. This is one of the reasons I made the decision early on not to take corporate PAC money. Is I really expect corporations to follow the law. And if they don't, I think there need to be meaningful consequences, not a slap on the wrist. And we're seeing corporations escape into bankruptcy to get their executives out of trouble by chipping in some money and not having to go through the whole bankruptcy process. That's what's happening in Purdue. So yes, I'm open to criminal laws about them, but I will also say this is where strong funding and strong oversight of the Department of Justice matters. Typically, prosecutors do not put the work and effort into holding corporations accountable in the same way that they do other kinds of criminals, violent criminals, transnational crime. And so that has been a long ongoing problem, is really making sure that we're holding corporations to account. It's one of the reasons that I championed the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, was because the other regulators, and there were a lot of them, weren't willing, for example, to hold banks feet to the fire. And I have real questions about whether or not the FAA is willing to hold airlines, and the Department of Transportation is willing to hold airlines feet to the fire. So Congress needs to be doing some of this oversight work, making clear to agencies, even in a Democratic administration, we have an oversight role to make clear that we expect them to enforce the laws on the books.
I think you missed the point of my question. The point was that corporations only have funds that they get from their customers or from investors, but that doesn't deter the behavior. Corporations don't behave. Individual executives make decisions. And unless those executives are looking at jail terms, they will not change their behavior. It's just a matter. PG&E today picked up a huge fine over the fires. Where do you think those fines are going to come from? The next story on the news was PG&E rates are going up. What a surprise. Who paid for those fines? It turns out that the ratepayers pay, the customers pay. And the executives, they sail off in their yachts. I think if they're looking at jail cells rather than yachts, their behavior starts to change. The fact is,
I will say, we do have criminal laws around things. including things like pollution, but they are very, very poorly and under enforced. And so your point about needing to hold the individual executives accountable, I think, is a right one. And I have called out individuals, including Wells Fargo's CEO, who had a very quick end to his career after I questioned him, because he was continuing to cheat customers. But I think, part of the issue is where we have had criminal laws. I'll be honest with you, we have not had very good track records of prosecutors being willing to apply them. And so that is also part of the solution here, is to pass the law, but also to think about how are we going to get these cases enforced, because we have not seen a willingness to do that.
Thank you, Katie Porter. I have a t-shirt that says, "I love oversight."
I do too.
And yes, I'm glad that we have you there in Congress doing oversight. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. My website's katieporter.com. If you have any questions, we have a pretty extensive issues page. And so I'm particularly proud of our issues page on disabilities and people with disabilities. So I encourage you to visit that. And if there are other issues you'd like me to address on our webpage, just let us know. We'd love to do it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ellen Marie. I just saw your
Yeah, there was another question in the chat that was a good one. Who was going to replace her in her district?
Oh, right. Yes. I'm sorry. We didn't get to that. I'm sorry. Thank you for putting that out. Well, I'm so glad we were able to have Congresswoman Katie Porter speak. And our next speaker has tremendously interesting information for Democrats, especially as activists that canvass and speak to voters. Dr. Broockman received his degree in political science from Yale University and his PhD from UC Berkeley. In 2015, he became an assistant professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. Dr. David Broockman has been a professor in political science at UC Berkeley for about 3 years. And he's best known for his research on political polarization, political persuasion, and reducing prejudice towards transgender people and undocumented immigrants, which has been widely covered in the national and international press. So thank you so much, David Broockman, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure, and it was also fun to be able to watch a little bit of Congresswoman Porter's remarks. So thanks for letting me join in on your meeting. So I was very honored to have the invitation. And I believe, is that right? You want me to talk for around half an hour? Is that right? I'm happy to do more or less, whatever.
Yeah, share your research. Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for the very kind introduction as well. So I've worked on a bunch of different topics. And so I knew that this audience today is, kind of a more advanced kind of political nerd audience. So I thought what I would do is go a little bit into kind of the details and the data of some of the studies we do and what we're doing in political science. So feel free to jump in if I'm, going too fast or too slow. But I thought I would share some of that. Oh, actually, you know what? I think I need permission to share screen so I can show you my presentation.
Oh, Cecilia, can you do that?
Okay, there we go. It says I'm a co-host now. Okay, great. So let me see. All right, my slides showing up? Yes, it is. Okay, great. So what I thought I'd do today, actually, that I thought would be kind of fun is, I could have given this talk one of two ways. One thing I could tell you is all the conventional wisdom in my field about political polarization. And what I thought would be more fun, though, is to take you kind of one step further to say, all right, what's the conventional wisdom? And then maybe why is that conventional wisdom a little bit in doubt? And what are the things that, we kind of think we know about political polarization that maybe we don't know, and give you kind of two sides of the debate. So as the kind of introduction I mentioned, so I'm an associate professor now at UC Berkeley, used to be at Stanford, and I'm also the first director of a new center at Berkeley called the Berkeley Center for American Democracy. So I'm happy to chat more about that. We're kind of starting new initiatives around a bunch of things, the history of race and polarization. We have a colleague working on a book about crime and policing and the history of that in democracy. So If any of you are kind of interested in getting involved, especially, Cal alumni, Berkeley is thinking about what can it do on kind of these issues about American democracy, please let me know. So that's my plug for our new center. And then I'll get into the kind of the substance of what I wanted to talk about today. So as I'm sure that you all know, the data is pretty bleak with respect to Americans' trust in government. It really started falling during the Nixon era, and kind of pre-Nixon, the vast majority of Americans said, yeah, we trust the government in Washington to do what's right almost all or most of the time. Now, almost nobody says that. I think like Congress and used car salesmen have like similar ratings. And of course, we see kind of more vivid examples of our democracy, being literally under attack. And so again, what I wanted to talk about today is not actually just what we know about this, but some of the things we think we might know. And then the other side of why our knowledge, so our job as researchers to kind of interrogate and understand what do we really know? What are the things we might not know about polarization? And so it was conventional wisdom in my field for a long time. The first thing I'll talk about today is the idea that politicians were all really extreme. So, all the Democrats are so far left and all the Republicans are so far right, and that voters basically just want everyone to move to the center. And that was conventional wisdom in my field for a long time. And I think there's actually some evidence that's not quite true. So I'll talk about that. A second, there's a lot of attention to this idea that if we want to bolster democracy and people's support for democratic norms, the really big problem is that voters dislike each other. That like if Republicans stop hating Democratic voters so much, then they would tell Trump to stop undermining democracy. And I want to say, well, maybe that's not actually the root of the problem. And the last piece of conventional wisdom I want to question today is the idea that today, like voters kind of won't change their mind, that everyone's really stubborn. And I want to show you some, I've done a bunch of studies, and this is my specialty, is focusing on political persuasion. I'll talk a little bit about some examples of why we might often find that and why we might not think that's true. Okay, so the first topic I'll dive into is this conventional wisdom that politicians are more extreme than voters. I won't bore you with it, but don't worry about all these graphs, but I just want to show you, basically, my field has been studying this for a while, and every time someone studies this, no matter how they do it, lots of fancy statistical methods, they come up with this answer, which is that, say that you look in Democrats in Congress, they would say, no one wants Democrats to be so progressive. There's only like 5% of people that want Democrats to be more progressive. Everyone else wants them to be more moderate. And the same on the Republican side. They say, none of these Republican primary voters want their politicians to be so extreme. They all want them to be more moderate. And I was thinking, that doesn't seem quite right. I know a lot of progressives out there. I also know a lot of conservatives out there. Maybe the politicians actually are not reflecting the voters as poorly as we might think. In particular, the implication of this view is that if we just empowered voters, then politicians would kind of be forced to move to the center. And so I want to talk a little bit about why it is we think we know this. What led all the people in my field to believe this is true. And this is where things got a little bit technical, but I thought this was an advanced audience, so I could take you into the weeds a little bit. What's basically happening under the hood, there's all this statistical jargon. Everything that leads to my field's conventional wisdom is this. We look at how people vote in Congress. We have all this data on how members of Congress vote. We look at how they vote on different issues. So say a bill to legalize abortion, a bill to raise taxes on the rich, a bill, say, about affirmative action. And then we average across all their votes and say, okay, well, how often are they voting in a progressive way? And if you vote progressively on everything, you're all the way on one side. And likewise, if you're a Republican, you vote in a conservative way on everything, you'd say, okay, you're all the way on the other. And then we assign these scores to every member of Congress about how progressive they are. And then we do the same thing for voters. And we ask them, okay, well, how would you have voted if you were in Congress about on all these bills? And when we do that, we find that very few voters are so consistently liberal or so consistently conservative. And so we say, okay, look, well, this voter one, for example, they're kind of have a liberal or progressive view on abortion and affirmative action, but actually not on, economics. And that leads us, when we look at those scores, we say, okay, well, the Democrats are all really liberal, the Republicans are all really conservative, and the voters are all in the middle. The big challenge with this, and one of the things that I've shown in my work, is that this kind of exercise, that the problem with it is it's really just measuring how consistently progressive you are across different issues or how consistently conservative you are. But that's actually not that doesn't really mean anything meaningful, right? And if we want to kind of compare like how, so imagine that these three voters like themselves constitute like a district that say a Democrat is trying to represent. You might say, well, what this Democrat should do is cast a liberal vote on every issue, because on every single issue, 2-to-1, the progressive views outnumber the conservative views. And so they should be voting in a progressive way. But notice, voting in a progressive way, voting with the majority on every issue, the supermajority on every issue, makes you look more extreme than the voters you're representing, because the individual voters are not so consistently on one side. So that's kind of a statistical paradox that's created. And if you think about the advice that my field was kind of giving to people, it was something like, well, in order, Democratic members of Congress, in order to represent voters better, you should just pick an issue, it doesn't matter which one, and vote against what your progressive constituents want, even though they're the majority. And so I looked at this and I was like, this doesn't seem right. That doesn't make sense to me. And in particular, how do we measure this better? Well, we need to actually look at each individual issue. And if we want to understand how progressive or conservative or moderate voters and politicians are, we actually have to measure that on each issue and say, for example, there's gradations on issues like abortion or taxes. So, what kind of tax rate do you want? There's, the DeSantis plan of like, I think 10%, flat national income tax. There's the Bernie Sanders plan on the other end. There's people in the middle. So we need more of that kind of, fine-grained information. So I won't get too into the weeds, but that's something that I've been doing in my research is basically, and these are really hard survey questions to write for researchers, but basically digging in and trying to come up with questions that kind of span the gamut of, okay, well, what would it mean to be moderate on each of these issues, or more progressive, or center left, or far right? And when we look at that data, what we find is that it's about 45% of people's issue opinions are actually either more progressive or more conservative than the parties. More often more progressive, but not always. And in some recent data that I've been collecting 10 years later, as I've been revisiting this, we find something similar. And so I won't dive into a lot of this, but you can see there's a lot of issues, for example, where a lot of voters actually, if you look at Social Security, for example, which is, can't find my mouse here to highlight it, but which is in the third column, fourth row. Voters are really progressive on Social Security. They want Democrats to expand it and tax the wealthy to fund it. And again, that's not something that you would think if you just thought, well, politicians are too extreme on everything. And so those kinds of, more progressive or more conservative views are actually pretty common. And I think that means that actually a lot of, say, the progressive politicians that existing political science research said are, say, out of step with their districts, actually their districts might be more progressive than we might think when we actually look at individual issues and we don't do these statistical procedures that try to put people on a one liberal conservative spectrum, like averaging across their views on all issues. And on many issues, actually, voters, they're more extreme. That is, they want either more progressive policy or sometimes more conservative policy than either party is giving them. And what that means is that empowering voters, in some cases, actually going to lead to policy becoming less moderate, sometimes in directions that progressives might like, sometimes actually in directions we might not like. So that's the first kind of piece of conventionalism I want to attack, is maybe voters are not as moderate as we think. The second is this idea that voters' dislike of each other is undermining democracy. And so the big, again, getting into the weeds a little bit for this audience, the big evidence we have for this, there's this federally funded survey called the American National Election Study. It's this big survey. Political scientists have been doing this survey for I want to say 70 years now or something, where it's a really high quality survey. People across the country are sampled. There's interviewers that are literally flown across the country to knock on people's doors to get a high response rate, to talk to people that won't answer the phone or don't have internet. So it's a really expensive, really high quality survey. It's like the census for political science, basically. And one of the questions that is asked is, well, what do you think about the other political party? And if you look over time, so the x-axis here, the horizontal axis is year, And the vertical axis here is how warm people's feelings are. And the two lines at the top that are more or less flat show you how Democrats feel about Democrats and how Republicans feel about Republicans. So it's how people feel about their own party. And more or less, people throughout history, at least modern American history, have always sort of liked their own political party, and that hasn't changed too much. What's really changed is it used to be in the 60s, people would say, you know, I really like my own party, and the other party is fine. Now, especially over the last 20 years, people say, you know, my party is pretty good, but the other party is terrible. And that kind of hatred of the other party is really growing. And that extends not only to people's views about politicians of the other party, but also their views about the people who just support and vote for the other party. And I'm sure all of us kind of feel some of this happening in our everyday life, right? So there's a lot of, so this is a screenshot from a paper I wrote. There's a lot of political scientists who, to be frank, say, you know, this graph seems like something bad is happening. You know, people hating the other party, that sounds bad. If you look out in the world, there's also bad trends going on. You know, reduced support for democratic norms, candidates like Trump. Maybe these two things are related. And there's a lot of academics, frankly, speculating that there must be some kind of relationship here, and that there's a bunch of things that this kind of, the term we use is affective polarization, this kind of hatred of the other party. There's a lot of assumption that's going to undermine democracy in some way. For example, undermining the public's willingness to hold politicians accountable because they're never willing to vote for the other side. Or so you could think of, you know, are Republicans not willing to vote for Biden, even if they hate Trump because they just hate Democrats even more. Or you might think that this is more likely to lead people to support violations of democratic norms. So a lot of the reason that we think we know this is if you do a survey, there's a really strong correlation between the people who, like, how much you hate the other party and these kinds of undemocratic, small d democratic attitudes or behaviors. And so the implication of this, and there's been a ton of money poured into this, is the idea that, well, if we want to bolster kind of support for democracy, then we got to attack this cause of affective polarization. And so the question is, okay, well, if we try to reduce this affective polarization, are we going to make democracy better? And as a social scientist, one of the questions that I am, you know, trained to ask now is whenever I see a correlation, I have to ask, well, correlation is not causation. We don't actually know because two things are correlated that one causes the other. And like a classic, you know, there's all these classic examples of this. One is if you look across the country and across different times, there's a really strong correlation between ice cream sales and murders. So the time when ice cream sales goes up is also when murders go up. So that's a correlation. Does that mean ice cream causes murders? If we like ban ice cream sales, or, you know, murder is going to go way down? Probably not. There's probably this other confounding factor there, which is in the summer, people, there turns like murder rates go up during the summer and also more ice cream is consumed. And so in the same way, I kind of wondered, well, there's this correlation between this one thing, affective polarization, this other thing, these democratic attitudes and behaviors. People assume there's a relationship here that's causal, but actually there's a bunch of things that could be affecting both of them. So like misperceptions of the other side. So for example, if you think the other side wants to violate democratic norms, that might lead you to want to violate them yourself because you're worried, you know, they're going to take away the norms first. So if they're going to cheat, then we have to cheat first. Or maybe just disagreeing on issues causes both these things. And so it might not be that targeting these kind of feelings towards the other side is the key things. It might be other things we need to target. And so to get at this question of, okay, well, if we reduced this affective polarization, this hatred of the other side, if we reduced that, would we actually improve these attitudes towards democracy? We actually have to see what happens if we improve it. And so that's what I did in a recent paper with some colleagues at Yale and Dartmouth. We did a bunch of different, basically, studies with people where we tried, I won't get too much in the details, but a bunch of different ways that people have developed to try to reduce this hatred. So you can correct misperceptions people have about the other side. You can get them to think about the people they know and love who are of the other side and say, okay, well, they're not so bad. And we say, okay, when we do this to people and we get them to hate the other side a little bit less, do we see all these benefits that we're told will come from that? So like being willing to vote for the other party's politicians, to being less just adopting their own party's views, being more supportive of bipartisanship, being more supportive of democratic norms, or misperceiving what's happening in the country less. And what we find when we do that is nothing, actually. So in a lot of different ways, we can successfully make people feel better about the other side. But then when we look to see, okay, well, does that make them more willing to vote for the other side, or more willing to say, well, their side has to abide by different norms? It doesn't. So if we're worried about, the people on January 6th attacking the Capitol, the answer is not to just make them kind of like Democrats more. There's kind of other deeper issues there. And so for me, like the spaces that I work in, there's a lot of foundations and individuals who are trying to figure out, they see what's happening out in democracy. They want to give their time or resources to improve it. And so one of our jobs as researchers and at the Center for American Democracy at Berkeley is to say, okay, well, we actually want to understand, not just what like sounds good, but what's actually going to work. And it seems like there's a lot of attention put into this idea of we need to reduce this form of affective polarization, and maybe that's actually not what we need to do. And so we probably have to think more about, well, what are the underlying reasons why people have these attitudes? And one example of that is a study by one of my colleagues at the center, who shows that correcting misperceptions about the other party's support for violating democratic norms improves their own. So an example here would be a lot of Republicans say that basically, when Democrats have power, they're just gonna, stop holding elections, and they're gonna, get rid of all of the protections, and, they don't want to let us vote, et cetera. And when you inform them, actually, like when we ask Democrats, almost no Democrats want to do that. Like they just want to play fair. There's actually really good evidence from this study that leads the Republicans to say, oh, okay, well, if they're willing to play fair, then I'm kind of more willing to do that too. And so just letting people know that the other side doesn't want to cheat actually makes them less likely to want to cheat. Okay, the last piece I'll talk about is the idea that voters are just too polarized to change their minds. I've done some research on this back when I was at Stanford, where we did a study of a bunch of different experiments that had been done by campaigns. So campaigns and very advanced data science, including work that we've done with them, where they'll do like a drug trial, but for politics. So imagine like the COVID vaccine trials, where instead of getting a COVID vaccine or a placebo, and then we compare your health outcomes, we do that for politics. We'd randomly assign voters to get TV or not, or mail or not, or persuasive phone calls or not, and then see what that does to how people vote. And looking at a lot of those kind of clinical trials and putting them together, we find that very often the effects are really, really small, if not zero. So persuasion is really hard. And we find that in a lot of domains. There was a really cool recent study on Facebook, for example. Facebook collaborated with a lot of academics and found that when they change what's in people's news feeds, it changes the kind of news they see, but it doesn't really seem to change their views about politics that much, suggesting, hey, maybe people are just really difficult to persuade. So a lot of people chalk this up to polarization and say, look, in today's polarized era, people are just too stubborn. And my view on this is yes, persuasion is hard. People know more about politics now, but actually, I think part of what we might need to do is just think harder about how to persuade people, and that our interventions just might need to be better. And I'll give you a couple examples of this from my own work. One is some work of a tactic that I've studied for a long time that's colloquially referred to as deep canvassing. And the idea of this, for those of you who have done canvassing before, a lot of political canvassing looks very one way. It's basically like a TV ad at the door. We knock on the door, we try to read something at you, and we go away to the next one. Deep canvassing is totally different. We have a two-way conversation with voters. We ask them what they think. Instead of giving talking points, we share a story. And this tactic was actually originally invented in the wake of Prop 8 by the Los Angeles LGBT Center, trying to understand, well, what do we do? Prop 8 actually won in LA County. And they said, wow, our own backyard is voting against marriage equality. What do we do about this? They started knocking on doors and developed this method. And they say, when we actually take the time to talk to people, hear their concerns, share our stories, we get a lot further than we just, read the thing that the, consultants and pollsters told us to say. So we've done some of these kind of clinical trials for politics of this method to see what it does. And in particular, the way these studies work is we'll invite people to a survey. they'll take a few online surveys for us. We'll then randomly assign them, so just like in a drug trial, to one group where canvassers go to their doors and talk to them about this issue in this full two-way conversation. We had a second group where they just got the standard kind of political talking points. And then a third group, a placebo group. So think of it like the salt water in the vaccine study, where we knock on their door and we talk about something unrelated, like recycling. And then later we separately follow up in a separate survey in the weeks and months to come to see what their views are. And in some research that we've been doing over the last decade, and this is Dave Fleischer, who I showed earlier, who's from the Los Angeles LGBT Center. We had this nice cover story in the New York Times Magazine about this a few years ago. We found these really impressive results from these studies where other people have said, persuasion is really difficult. These graphs are a little hard to read, so I won't go through them too much, but basically what these graphs show, the top graph is showing our estimates of the effects of this kind of talking points, like short intervention on people's views. In this case, this was a canvas trying to improve people's attitudes towards undocumented immigrants. We didn't find that much of an effect, but when we look at the full deep canvas, there's a much larger effect. And more shockingly, from our point of view in social science, even when we do find persuasion, we often find that it decays. So people kind of might be persuaded by a TV ad when they're watching it, but a week later they forgot they saw it, they go back to where they were. In this case, we find that the persuasion actually sticks. So those effects last, and of course that's really important if you want to be, for example, working in the months ahead of a ballot measure to build support. That's been replicated now in 8 different experiments we've done on a bunch of different issues. It does not depend on the canvasser themselves being of a certain group. And we also find that this affects the canvassers too. So when we have all these canvassers going out and talking to voters, an interesting thing, you might imagine that the kind of canvasser, and I've been one of them too, that goes out to canvass people about these progressive issues, often starts off with kind of pretty poor views of the voters. They say, oh, all these bigoted voters we're going to talk to, they start off not liking them. Their views of those voters that disagree with them also improve, actually, because they spend time talking to them and they realize, you know what, they're more open-minded than I thought once we tell them our stories. So we're continuing to work on this right now. We're doing some studies on the importance of listening and trying to understand how important that kind of rapport and listening is in these conversations. And we'll hopefully have more research on that in a few months. Another thing that I think is really underrated in the world of persuasion is that so many political campaigns tell voters things they already know. And one example of this was in 2020. In mid-2020, Biden had won the nomination. Frankly, a lot of the people that work for the Democratic campaigns, though, were working for the independent expenditure campaigns, working for the Biden campaigns. They were kind of younger voters, younger people that kind of were excited about Bernie, and they weren't that excited about Biden. And so they weren't writing ads about Biden. They were just writing ads about why Trump was bad. And so if you look at this graph on the right, in summer 2020, only 11% of Democratic ads were about Biden. 88% were about Trump. But the weird thing about that is that if you look at what people had heard about, because Trump was president then, most people had heard a lot about Trump, and they weren't hearing very much about Biden. Even though, so all these people in this election, all these persuadable voters, Trump has already been president for 4 years. They've been hearing about him for 5 or 6 years, or their whole lives, if they're following The Apprentice. They know a lot about this guy. On the other hand, Biden, yeah, he was vice president, but that was a while ago. They don't know that much about what he stands for and what he wants to do. And as of summer 2020, the Democrats were not telling them. They were just telling them why Trump was bad, but people already knew a lot about Trump, and they were letting the Republicans define Biden. So we came out with this study where we did some experiments, and we showed, either way, actually, if we show people messages and persuasive material about Biden, either positive or negative, that has, so those are the bars on the left, that has way larger effects than the giving people information about Trump. We actually, for this study, tested over 200 different anti-Trump messages, because with Donald Trump, there's always something new, and we always feel like, all right, this is going to be the thing that gets him. So we tried it all. And not one of those messages was like a standout message. They all basically didn't work. But the pro-Biden messages worked really well. And our takeaway from that is Democrats were so focused on telling people things they already knew about Trump, this candidate they knew a lot about. They needed to think more about telling voters things they didn't know. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to questions, is that I think part of this it comes from the fact that what works is really hard to predict. And so this is a graph from a recent study where we measured the effects of a lot of different messages, and we asked like real top flight political consultants and political operatives to predict what their effects would be. So like, for example, here's 5 ways to persuade people to be more pro-choice. What do you think is going to be most effective? And then we actually measured the effects of those messages. And so in this graph, the horizontal axis is the actual effects of those messages, and the vertical axis is what the politicians and political consultants thought would be the effect. The kind of pink or salmon dots are the practitioners that we asked, and we also asked some members of the mass public, just some ordinary people, these questions. You might notice there's not really a relationship here, and we find that basically these practitioners don't do better than guessing. So all these high-paid consultants are just not very good at knowing what persuades voters, consistent to us with the idea that they need to do a little bit, look more in the data, and part of the issue is this persuasion is not done that well. But I do think persuasion is possible. One more example of this, I think a really hard case for my optimism that voters can be persuaded is a study I did on Fox News viewers. In some data we got, it's Republicans with a cable subscription, a third of Republicans with a cable subscription are watching over 8 hours a month of Fox News and no CNN or MSNBC. So there's a huge Fox News audience. And we did a study where we recruited a bunch of those people, like Republican, hardcore Fox News viewers, and we paid them for a whole month to watch CNN instead of Fox News to see what would happen. And a lot of people who said, oh, polarization is so bad, not only said this wouldn't change people's minds, but actually thought it would backfire. And it would just, taking a Republican who watches Fox News and having them watch CNN, it's just going to make them dig in more. And so we did this study where we recruited people using data from a media company of people who actually watched Fox News. We recruited them to these surveys. We randomly assigned them to either a control group, so just like the salt water in the vaccine study, or a group that got this treatment of watching CNN. So we quizzed them on what was on CNN to make sure they watched it, and then we did follow-up surveys with them to see how watching CNN changed their views. And these are some examples of some of the attitudes that meaningfully changed. So, for example, people, this first graph shows you kind of learning that occurred. So people were way more likely during this period, this was done in August 2020, to be aware of the kinds of facts that CNN was telling them. So they were willing to learn about bad things Trump had done. For example, the fact that Trump was not willing to say he would accept the results of the election, the fact that he was not taking COVID precautions at these rallies and turning his rallies into super spreader events back in 2020, the fact that he was aware COVID was going to be way worse than the flu privately. And we also find it changes not just what they know, but their actual views. For example, these hardcore Fox News viewers were way less likely to say that they thought Trump was doing a good job encouraging Americans to stay safe from COVID. They were less likely to say that it was an overreaction to go protest in response to the police shooting of Jacob Blake. And we see a bunch, and they're also just more positive, less positive towards Trump overall. So my view on this is persuasion absolutely is difficult, even in a polarized era. But if you can persuade the hardcore Fox News, like 8 hours a month viewers, then I think you can, then there's much more room for persuasion than we think. Probably in cases when we tell stories and kind of meet people where they are and have conversations instead of just talking at them. In cases where we tell people things they don't know. And in cases where we use these kinds of studies to figure out what might be most persuasive. Okay, so I'm talking for a while, so I'll turn it over to questions here. And just to conclude, a lot of people in my field, they think no voters want politicians to, be more progressive or be more conservative. I think that might not be so true. A lot of people think the real problem is that voters dislike each other. It seems like making voters like each other more doesn't actually solve the problems as much as we thought. And last, voters are too polarized to change their mind. Persuasion is hard. There is some truth to this, but it's not the whole story. Okay, so thank you. I am looking forward to your questions.
Whoa. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. We have a question from Cecilia.
Yes, thank you. That was a fascinating conversation that you had there. And I wanted to just focus on your discussion about deep canvassing. And I am so a fan of deep canvassing. As a little bit of background, and I know many of in this audience here know because I've made the pitch quite a bit, but I lead almost every weekend a pretty sizable team of Bay Area people down to the Central Valley for canvassing. And we focus, I call it meaningful conversations, but it's the same as deep canvassing. And really focus on the quality of the conversations. And we just, as opposed to, I don't want to see high metrics and high stats and so forth. So I understand how important it is, but what I struggle with sometime, I'm doing this as a volunteer, primarily through grassroots organizations, which is very amenable to that way of being. But I'm constantly sort of having debates, I guess would be the kind way of putting it, with campaigns or political parties about the efficiency or the efficacy of these deep canvassing techniques, because they are not easily measured, because you can very easy, many of my canvassers spend 10 minutes plus at a door, and campaigns and political parties want numbers fast.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we make that transition, because right now it seems, from my just observation, it's mostly the grassroots organizations that are embracing that.
Yeah. So super great question. And I could talk about this for another, half hour, but I'll say a couple things about it. I think one is that I think it's actually not an accident that like the volunteer organizations kind of do this more, and the campaigns that are paying canvassers do this less, because I think it's actually really hard to get paid canvassers to do this kind of work. You can do it, but if the canvasser is not there because they want to have those conversations, a paid canvasser, you send them out on doors, and you're not there over their shoulder knowing what they're doing. And so there's kind of an accountability and supervision issue that I think makes this kind of deep canvas a little bit harder in a paid context. It's even for example, like paid phone calls I think can be really good, because you can listen in and make sure that the paid callers are following the scripts when you're doing get out the vote. But I think for paid canvassing, it's really challenging. So I'm not saying it can't work, but I do think it's not an accident that when the volunteers are motivated and to really dig in with voters, that that's more amenable to this. A second thing I guess I'd say is that I don't think it's wrong to think about this question of scale. This deep canvassing approach was really took off in the context of these two issues, undocumented immigrants and transgender people, where there have actually been a lot of these little micro ballot initiative elections, where you'll have these kind of small towns that will have an initiative about, should we include transgender people in non-discrimination ordinances, or should we be a sanctuary city? And if you've got a town of 10,000 people in a state where people from neighboring towns can come in, it's not crazy to think that you could actually talk to or try to talk to every person in that town. And that tactic might make a lot of sense. Now, when you're thinking about, so say that you're in Pennsylvania, a state with millions of people, it might be that the most valuable thing you could do as an individual volunteer is talk to your persuadable neighbors and have a longer conversation. But for a campaign, it's really daunting to be able to think about how would you scale this technique across millions of people, or if you're, say, the Biden campaign, millions of people across many tens of millions of people across many swing states. And so I do think that the calculus is a little bit different depending on what kind of election you're talking about, because reaching this kind of scale, especially in our current tight labor market, when the paid canvassers are expensive, a lot of people have less volunteer time, is challenging. So I think that the math is a little bit trickier, and at the same time, I think if you've got a lot of volunteers as a campaign, and it's one thing to think about, okay, should we spend our money on this? But if you have a bunch of volunteers, I think the case is a lot stronger to say, look, if you've got volunteers and they're motivated, they're going to often know the people in their community that need to be talked to, give them the tools to have these more meaningful conversations.
Just as an aside, the campaigns let us get away with our deep canvassing approach because we bring a lot of people from the Bay Area to the Central Valley. So they sort of just sort of say, okay, do what you want.
Well, and the other thing about it, we haven't studied this, statistically, but, doing these experiments, we really have to get in the weeds with the organizations because we have to make sure they're following all the experimental protocols. So like we're really in the trenches, doing, I go out and canvas too to make sure, everything is working right. And one of the things that anecdotally that I really feel, as a participant is that the experience of doing this canvassing is just a lot more pleasant, right? When you're not, treating people like numbers, but you can actually spend, 10 minutes with someone and talk to them. It just feels a lot more meaningful. I think in some ways it's actually more tiring. It's a little emotionally exhausting sometimes, like the stories you hear from people, right? But we find that at the end of these Canvas programs, there's two things I can actually say that are like a little more, a little bit less anecdotal. One is at the end of these Canvas programs, some of which have involved paid canvassers. The paid canvassers sometimes say, I want to keep doing this. How do we? I would do it for free, and that's just not true for a traditional political canvas. The other thing is on the voter side of things. One of the questions I often get from political professionals about this is, well, what kind of voters are going to agree to have a 10-minute conversation? But you know what? So we track this really well. So every time in all of our studies, a canvasser goes to a door, we track, what happens? Do they knock on the door and no one's there? If they are there, do they have the conversation? Do they not? Upwards of 80% of the time in every study we've done, if someone is home and opens the door, they end up having the full conversation. Because it's really different than, reading at someone off a page and they're like, I don't want to listen, what's going on. If you treat someone like a human being, actually there's a lot of people who would love to talk and no one's ever asked them what they think or, for stories about their life and what they think about what's going on. And are actually there to listen to them. And so we actually get the vast majority of people being happy to have these kinds of conversations.
Absolutely agreed.
That's really neat. So do we have other questions?
There's one from Luz I saw. Let's see.
In chat? Oh, here's one from Jillian in chat. It
Okay.
says, is there any evidence that this type of campaigning helps with retention? Is there good training for this?
Yeah, and
campaigning can be burnout, and this seems better. So yeah, there's training for this.
I'll also put my email in the chat in case any of you want to follow up with me about anything. Feel free to drop me a note. So I think not. There hasn't been like a proper rigorous study where like what my like academic brain goes to. Okay, well, what we have to do is do an experiment, and so we got to take canvassers and randomly assign some to do the deep canvas, some to do not deep canvas, and then see how long they last. We haven't done like a rigorous experiment like that. But I will say that semi-anecdotally that the deep canvassing programs that I've seen, just in my personal experience, do tend to have an easier time, keeping people around. So I wish I had something better to go on than that, but I do think, anecdotally, it does seem to be a bit better. So
can you direct us to training then if we email you?
Yeah, actually, there's a few I can train you to out there. One is the training for the first study we did on this. In 2016, there's a kind of a whole manual of how that program was designed. So I'm happy to point you to that as one example, and there's others too.
Okay, I can share it later in the email.
And I can provide some stuff that we have too, Brody.
Oh, good, thank you. We have a question from Ellis Goldberg. Ellis?
Hi, I'm wondering where the narrative comes from. That you're not and
you're garbled, Ellis, you're garbled.
You're breaking up, Ellis. all I heard was where did the narrative come from?
Okay, yeah, so the,
I mean,
the audio's not, but I think I understood the question though, which is
That's great.
which is I think anyway, which is basically, and it's well, maybe it's just because so we're right now in this canvassing area, we're working on two sets of follow-up research. So one I mentioned in the presentation, which is another important element of this canvas is listening, and we think that's a really important part, but that's the part, as I think it was Cecilia was saying, that like campaigns push back against. It's like, why do we have to listen to voters? Like, we're the ones that are supposed to do the talking, right? And so we're now doing studies right now that really trying to isolate that experimentally, and in a very precise way show, like, when you listen to people, like, does that, to what extent does that actually open them up more to be persuaded. So that's something that we think is like a, probably driving our results, but we're going to kind of isolate that. The other thing we're working on too, what was the question is, as I mentioned, in these deep canvassing conversations, there's this exchange of stories. So the canvasser will often ask people for a story from their life, and then likewise, the canvasser will often tell a story from their life or from someone they know. And so in the case of the canvassing about undocumented immigrants, none of the canvassers were themselves undocumented, but they would often have family members or close friends. And so they would tell a story of like, okay, well, here's why this issue matters to me. Let me tell you about my sister or my friend. And we, in the canvases, because not that many people know like a lot of undocumented immigrants, we sort of just let people tell whatever story they wanted. And we didn't have a lot of control over it because we knew for any given person, there's not going to be a lot of choices. We can't say, not everyone has like a specific story of like, tell a story about an undocumented immigrant being, discriminated against or whatever. They can have all kinds of different stories depending on the people they know. So what we've done now is we've gone back, and all the studies we've done, we always though have recorded and have the canvassers write down afterwards, okay, well, when you were telling stories at the door, what stories were you telling? And we've gone back now and analyzed all those to say, well, what kinds of stories are told? And we've categorized them. And it turns out there's about 7 categories of stories that are told. So I won't go into all of them. So there's like, for example, giving back to the community, there's like assimilating in America, there's being discriminated against, this kind of stuff. And now we're doing follow-up experiments to exactly what I think what Mr. Goldberg was getting at, which is, okay, well, if you're going to tell those kinds of stories, like what kind of stories should they be? And we're looking at this. So we have all 7 stories, and we're looking at this across 4 groups: undocumented immigrants, transgender people, and also Jewish Americans and Asian Americans. So kind of groups on kind of all the spectrum of kind of the kind of stereotyped as kind of low or high status and this kind of thing. So we are working on those results now, and investigating and trying to understand like what sorts of stories are best. And we hope that can then feed back into the field to say, hey, if you've got a story like this kind of story seems to be most effective, as well as ad campaigns where, I think these stories could be great for, 30-second, 60-second TV ads. If we're going to feature the stories of, these different groups, what kind of stories should we be telling?
Okay. Wow. Okay. There's a question in chat from Jillian. It says, is there any evidence that this type of campaigning helps with retention? And it seems like that one of your slides showed that. They showed over time that this type of campaigning works. Is that correct? Yeah,
there's 2 ways to look at it. So one is what I mentioned earlier about, I don't think we have the great data to show it, which is that, but my suspicion is that it does help keep the kind of canvassers engaged. The other, so one of the really depressing things, so for example, TV ads, the vast majority of campaign spending is spent on TV. And I do think the best evidence goes to show TV does have some effect, like it's not all wasted, but the effects of TV wear off really quickly. And so, I mean, it's literally like, we talk about like in the natural sciences, they talk about the like half-life of a substance. So in the same way, you can look at like the half-life of a TV ad, like how quickly does it wear off? And the half-life is something like 12 hours, where like every 12 hours, like half of the effect has gone away. So, and you can, I think, probably reflect on that yourself, right? Like when when we do see like a really compelling ad, like in the moment, you're like, wow, that's great. Or like, you hear a candidate come to your meeting and speak, in the moment, you're like, wow, this person's really compelling. But then sometimes over time, a week later, you're like, well, that was just kind of all right. And I think that's a natural human thing that we often have these experiences, but then we kind of over time go back to baseline. And that's just kind of, we see that in response to a bunch of different political events. Like think about post 9/11, there was this huge spike in, a lot of different, issue attitudes around, terrorism and, approval of, then President Bush. And then over time, it kind of goes away. So the same thing happens with TV ads. And I think the remarkable thing about these canvases is that the effects just seem to stick a lot more. Psychologically, we think that actually this kind of listening and two-way conversation piece is part of why that's happening. That like when I teach classes, for example, I don't just sit there and lecture at the front of the room, like what I did today, apologies. I try to like involve the students in discussion. You have them write essays, you have them use their knowledge. And in the same way, these deep canvases, part of getting the voter to talk back at you is, to be polite, like they have to listen to you. It's like engage in the conversation and like listen to what you're saying. Whereas if you're just being all one way and you read something and leave, like they don't actually have to think about what you're saying. And a lot of the basic science we have from psychology says if you want people to remember something, they have to kind of actively process and engage and think about what you're saying to kind of commit it to memory. And so we think that could be part of what's going on and why these effects last. But that's something else that we're trying to look at in this, in this study of listening.
Well, we have an interesting question from Lori Wolf. She says, in chat, are the people on the other side of the political spectrum, I suppose she means the Republicans, are they also using deep canvassing techniques, and how is it going for them? Do you know?
Yeah. So not as far as I'm aware, actually, which is interesting. It's possible it's happening. I think, one of the funny things about being an academic that studies campaigns and, public opinion is that you really see that being invited groups to like this one, Democrats are just a lot more open to, well, what is the latest science showing us? What are, studies saying? What are academics finding? And I don't get a lot of emails from, maybe just because I'm at Berkeley, but I think there's frankly just less interest in the kind of academic science of persuasion from the Republican side. And, frankly, I think that when you look at these like really, campaigns are, the effects of campaigns are small, right? These persuasion is really hard. On the other hand, our last couple presidential elections have been really close. And I actually don't think it's crazy to think that if the Republicans were like a little bit better at using the latest, data science and experiments and the other things Democrats do, building in large part on academic research, that they might do a little bit better. So I think some of this stuff, it's all fighting on the margins, but the margins are small.
Yes, this is fascinating research. Thank you so much. As you can see, our members are using it, and so it's really fascinating to have the actual data on it. So thank you so much, David Broockman, for coming to our meeting.
Thank you, and again, feel free to drop me a note if you want to chat with me or talk about our Berkeley Center for American Democracy. Happy to.
Oh, well, tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, so what happened, about a year ago, campus leaders at Berkeley got together and said, we're approaching this really contentious election. There's a lot of people, our students and our faculty and our alumni who are concerned about the trends in American democracy. And we also have a lot of different faculty members at Berkeley who are doing a lot of great research. As I mentioned, research on trying to understand the political roots of some of our policing and crime crises in California and nationwide, polarization in my work, and persuasion, and we need kind of a home for some of this to support this kind of research. So we're still building this. We're looking for community partners, people that kind of want to get involved, especially if any of you are Cal alumni. I know most of you are in the area, so feel free to reach out. We're getting in on the ground floor, putting this together.
And what will you be doing?
Well, we're trying to, right now, we're just trying to put together our vision, actually. So we're open to your ideas. So, we're putting together strategies with respect to how do we support research, what kind of research needs to be done, What are the things we need to be studying? How do we, effectively use, especially in the Bay Area, Berkeley's brand and voice to try to support democracy? So we are all ears if you have thoughts and suggestions.
Oh, I see. Okay, that sounds great. How interesting. Well, I'll have to look into that. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really,
Great, thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Rick Adler.
Thanks, Brody. I understand Tim is going first. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Glad you're all here because we need to know more about our candidates in the November election. And starting tonight, we're going to listen to Tim Grayson, Marisol Rubio, who are running for State Senate District number 9. Tim Grayson was first elected to serve the California Assembly in November 2016, representing the 15th Assembly District, Assembly District, which encompassed parts of the East Bay, North Bay, including Concord, Pittsburgh, and Pleasant Hill. Now, prior to that election to the Assembly, he was a member of the Concord City Council and also served as Concord's mayor from 2014 to 2015. He is the first in his family to earn a college degree. Since being elected to the Assembly, he has focused on issues related to addressing the housing crisis and transportation crisis. He's co-founder of the Contra Costa Family Justice Center. He also continues to serve as the Concord Police Department Critical Response Chaplain, providing emotional support and counseling to first responders, victims, and their families. Please welcome Tim Grayson to speak about his campaign. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. And may I?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. For those that don't know me, my name is Tim Grayson. And by the way, that was an absolutely fabulous presentation by Dr. Broockman. I hope I can get his material, or at least buy the book. With that, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you for having me. And just a little bit about myself, although the introduction was very generous and gracious. I and my wife of 35 years, going on 36 years. Of course, we got married when I was 5. But I didn't want to age myself too much. But we have been in the East Bay in Concord area for almost 3 decades. We do have 2 young adult children, a daughter and a son. And as we were raising them, we have over the years seen the cost of living skyrocket. Good paying jobs become harder to come by, and actually becoming a homeowner move further out of reach. That's not even to include healthcare and education being very expensive and really often inaccessible. So with my children being priced out of the community, what my concern was I didn't want to have to get on an airplane to go visit my grandkids one day because my children couldn't afford to live where I raised them or where my wife and I raised them. So I'm running for state senate because I do want better for our next generation. I want better for the community and even our state. I do believe that California deserves a bright future. It is one of the largest economies in the world, and I want to use the experience that was brought out in the introduction to be able to make all of that a reality. I do serve as an assembly member. I just started into my 8th year. I represent over half or about half of Contra Costa County residents. It's a role that I've been in since 2016. As was said, I served on the city council prior to that. I was elected in 2010, served as a council member, then became vice mayor in 2013, and then mayor in 14 and 15. I've been serving in some type of elected official or in some type of capacity for over a decade now. Again, serving in local government. I was able to balance Concord's $90 million budget and build a 30% reserve during the Great Recession. It was an invaluable experience on the local level in which I've been able to turn into action and results on the state level. During my time on city council, I co-founded the Contra Costa County Family Justice Center. The reason why I bring that back up again because it was in the intro for me, is because this is a one-stop shop that helps victims of interpersonal violence, which includes domestic violence, it includes child abuse, elder abuse, and human trafficking. In the Assembly, I've been able to author some of the strongest in the nation laws to put a stop to predatory lending, to protect renters from unjust evictions and rent hikes, and then also help the financially vulnerable to survive the pandemic. I've also worked to increase fines against refineries and I was recognized as a clean air policy leader by Bay Area Quality Management District. I have taken on the challenge to keep the East Bay from becoming the next Detroit and recreate the Rust Belt by authoring a bill that was signed by the governor and creating the Green Empowerment Zone that addresses the transition from fossil fuel to green and clean energy and manufacturing. It's a pilot program for the entire state of California. It preserves livable wage union jobs, and it addresses economic and environmental justice as we transition from dirty energy or dark energy to green and clean energy. In addition, I helped pass nation-leading single-use plastics reduction legislation. And some of the examples, if I may, some of the examples of work that I've been able to accomplish as an Assembly member goes back to my work addressing UC admissions for California students. When they graduated, they were not able to get into our Cal States or our UC specifically, our UC systems as easy as an out-of-state or a foreign student. So this bill made it so that California students that graduated were first choice for those schools. I also passed legislation and did work to be able to create a study that recommended feasible ways to reduce fees associated with residential development. Another project was multidisciplinary teams for human trafficking and domestic violence. Why that was so important was because our agencies were playing the telephone game. They couldn't talk in a group. They had to talk one agency to the next in a linear form. And through this bill that became law, it allowed them to not play the telephone game, but actually collaborate with one another. I was able to work with my colleagues and create transit-oriented development, delivered $77 million for what you all know as the Highway 4 680 interchange, which was one of the most dangerous highway interchanges in the state of California, and securing $77 million to improve that interchange did a lot. I stood up against consumer or predatory lending and joint authored with now the Senate Chair, Senator Lamone, a bill that addressed predatory lending. One of the things that's very important to me is our mental health on multiple levels. But in this particular case, I worked on two projects, passing both of them and getting them signed by the governor. And that was AB 1116, AB 1117, which created a peer support and mental health program for our firefighters. In 2017, more firefighters committed suicide than actually died in the line of duty. My son, being a firefighter, very important to me that we take care of them and we protect them and provide them the mental health resources that they need. I also worked with my colleagues, Assemblymember Chu at the time, and Assemblymember Bonta and Wicks on protecting our renters, streamlining housing developments, ensuring that air ambulance providers are able to continue providing life-saving emergency response services, creating the Green Empowerment Zone, as I mentioned before, addressing affordable housing, getting $6 million for our Special Olympics, the emergency rental assistance program. I was able to get a bill signed by the governor for that, making sure that I fought for $350 million in the Cal Home for first-time home buyers, as well as securing $3 million to bring back to our district for our East Bay Regional Parks District, and several other things. But I just wanted to say this. I'm running for state senate because I'm hoping to continue the work that I've done in the Assembly, finding pathways to grow our economy, create new jobs, and support for our workers, leading efforts to build a more affordable housing faster while protecting our renters and always fighting to make our community better for all who live in our community. And one of my top priorities is preserving the rights of all, whether it's the right to access reproductive health, or LGBTQ youth, the right to attend schools safely without even the threat of adverse actions that would be taken against them. That is why I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood Northern California and Equality California. May I also just, in closing, announce that I've been endorsed by organizations such as the California Labor Fed, the California State Building Trades, and the locals, the California Professional Firefighters, the California Federation of Teachers, and then also state and local leaders like Assemblymember Speaker Robert Rivas, and then Assembly members Rebecca Bauer Kahan, Mia Bonta, Evan Lowe, Buffy Wicks, State Controller Malia Cohen, State Treasurer Fiona Ma, and many, many more. You can find them on my website. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all tonight. I know it's late, maybe a little past our time, but I am open for some questions.
Do we have some questions for Mr. Grayson? Areas that you're particularly concerned about. Looks like Melanie.
Thank
Melanie, you have...
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Melanie. How are you?
Great. Because I've lived in Concord my whole life, and it's a great place to live.
Yes, it is.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Rebecca, as if you are advanced to the Senate. Can you affect this, what I was talking about with the fireworks and being legal in California, the Senate route? And let me just add one thing too, why it's so upsetting to me. I literally see everyone in my community get nervous on July 4th. I see people at the grocery store, and it's like, we're going home and button down the hatches. People are putting their dogs in with medication and in bathtubs. And so, you know, it is only one day a year, except it does overflow to the Super Bowl and New Year's Eve. But that's why I ask about it. So how could you affect that?
Would be even willing to carry that legislation if need be. I will tell you, with my son being a firefighter, 3 of those years that he's been in that profession, he served on Contra Costa County's hand crew. Those are the folks, the women and men, that go out without any fire hose. They go out with a tool in their hand and they fight the wildfires and the danger that their lives are in because of some careless, we call it mistake, but some careless act. And so with that, and also in my duties as a state representative, going up to Paradise and walking through that area and seeing the devastation, the lives that were lost, the memories that were literally burned up in the smoke. This is an absolute no-brainer. And Melanie, I'm with you 100%. This is something that at best should only be done on a professional level in the state of California. Otherwise, it doesn't belong in the hands of folks in our streets and communities that could put literally entire cities at risk.
Right, because I don't know that much about fire and you know, but I know some of the fires that have been massive in California have been started by fireworks.
Yeah, I would agree. Also, other litigating factors to that, but I agree that we don't need to have something add on to what we're already facing as a crisis with climate change and with fires
and drought.
And drought, yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. Grayson? I was just going to ask Tim, this is a different district than was in effect before. I think it was Nancy Skinner had the old district. What have you done to kind of reach out to the members of the new district that you may have not had contact with before?
So we are reaching out to particular groups, whoever we have contacts with. I go from top to bottom, side to side. We're meeting with anyone that'll meet with us. Anyone from San Leandro, meeting up with groups down there. Just recently met with the mayor and a few folks from San Leandro. I go all the way over to Antioch, and we've been working with groups, meeting with groups over there as well. And I'll be in Crockett here soon. So no place is too small, and no stone's not worth turning over.
Sounds good. Any other questions? Looks like Jillian, you're muted though. Yeah, go
Hi,
Hi.
ahead.
Tim. I am Jillian Elliott. I'm with, when I'm not just being me, I'm also part of Healthy Martinez. And one of the issues that's very important to us is holding the refineries accountable in our area. And we would very much like to meet with you, by the way. But wondering how closely you are following what's happening in the Martinez area. We have two refineries in particular that are causing a great deal of grief. The one in the PBF Martinez Refinery Company has had more than 40 violations in the last 13 months, and 2 of them have been level 2. The other refinery has had 1 employee burned over 80% of his body in an accident there. And I'm curious how you would approach working with the refineries in this role.
Thank you for that question. I greatly appreciate it. By the way, and we would be more than happy to provide a letter that we sent. I don't know if it's the last time or the time before, when a refinery allowed pollutants to go up into the air, creating an alert for the community. And I met with residents who actually had residue on their back patios. And I authored a letter and sent it in, calling for those that are responsible to be held to the fullest of the law and extent of the law. So if you want to reach out to my office and give us your email address or whatever, we would, it's public. We would be more than happy to provide that letter to you, in which we called for that, them to be held responsible. I do want to state as well, once again, as I mentioned before, that I voted to increase civil penalties on refineries that release toxin pollutants into the air. I also, which is why Bay Area Air Quality Board did reach out and give me the Clean Legislator Award, was because I helped secure $100 million for the fence line monitoring. I also supported legislation to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, which means these refineries are not going to be around forever. As a matter of fact, their end is in the horizon. And they are going to have to either transition to green and clean energy, or they're going to have to close and go away. And then I also supported SB X1 and 2. This was the special session that we held, in which the governor created the California Energy Commission board or commission that is allowed to investigate and potentially cap oil industry profits. So with that, they also do the investigation of the refineries, have no problem taking them to task, and have no problem holding them accountable for their actions, especially when it puts others in harm's way.
Thank you. I will absolutely get in touch with your office.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Just one last thing. We are experiencing either flaring or some other violation on an average of every 8 days in Martinez.
I would ask you to, every time something like that happens, although I also get the alerts, but just I'm not trying to put it on you if it's too much, but every time something like that happens, reach out to the office, ping us, let us know, here we go again, and I will be at your side, shoulder to shoulder, holding them accountable.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions? It's starting to get a little later, and we want to make sure we hear from Marisol Rubio. But one more time, more questions for Mr. Grayson? Looks like Luz Gomez has a question. Tim, what is your position on carbon capture and storage?
So carbon capture is proving to, and still we're looking at the results, we're looking at what's happening. But as of right now, we have one project that's taking place in our own county, Contra Costa County. It's called Calpine. So far, they've been able to successfully operate their project of carbon capturing. And one of the most incredible things, one of the greatest emitters of carbon into our environment is the production of concrete. And what Calpine, the carbon capture project, has been able to do is capture carbon, turn it into a hardened product that is inserted into the concrete manufacturing process, so that it literally cuts down the carbon that is emitted by the concrete, by the production of concrete. So not only are they taking carbon out, but they're hardening it and putting it into a concrete process to reduce emissions back into the environment. So far, it's showing through science that it's producing some positive results.
Very good. All right, I think that is it for our first speaker for the Senate here.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you
Adler.
very much, Tim, for being with us tonight.
All right.
All righty. Got the pleasure of introducing our second speaker, Marisol Rubio, who's running for District 9. Marisol previously served as Director and Vice President of the Dublin San Ramon Services District. More recently, she was elected to the San Ramon City Council in November 2022. She is a founding advisory board member of the nonprofit that advocates for women's reproductive health, education, and treatment, as well as a fund that advances policies to protect individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Marisol pursued her undergraduate education at UC Berkeley, where she earned a degree in molecular and cellular biology. She was very passionate about healthcare, and that I think arises from her daughter, who was born with looked like fatal brain cancer, but fortunately was able to survive that. And just recently her daughter Alex was accepted to UC Davis, and will be starting in the this winter here right now up in Davis. So I'm very happy to welcome Marisol Rubio to speak to us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I am very humbled and honored to be here with you today. I also want to thank your club personally for endorsing me in my past 2 campaigns. And one of the reasons I won almost 65% of the vote in San Ramon. I am also just recently renewed my membership for the San Ramon Valley Democratic Club. And so I've been with you guys for a while now. Yes, I agree that your guest speaker today was quite impressive. Very curious to learn more about his work. So throughout my life, I faced challenges with perseverance and resilience. I was inspired by my mother, a first-generation immigrant and single parent who earned a master's degree in education and taught in a high-needs school district for 30 years. When I became a mother, my daughter was diagnosed with brain cancer at just 13 months old. I became an advocate for my child when medical and educational systems were unresponsive to her needs. Specifically, they had recommended that she go enter into hospice care rather than pursue treatment. But had I listened to her, she would not be here. Instead, I asked them for their top 3 choices, and I myself personally went and researched the different options and chose the chemotherapy that led to her positive outcome. Similarly, with her education, I was advised during her last IEP that she should go into vocational education rather than pursue a college degree in psychology. And again, I told them I'm not in the business of setting ceilings. Instead, I applied my education in molecular cell biology with an emphasis in neurobiology to help my daughter overcome her learning disabilities. And because of that, she is now a double major at UC Davis in psychology and Spanish. But it's that persistence and courage to go against the doctors of better judgment and educators' better judgment is literally the only reason she is a long-term survivor. And that despite her learning disability, she has achieved all that she has achieved academically. But it also really opened my eyes to the systemic barriers that are often happening within our society, to communities of color, to single mothers, and people of low socioeconomic status. So determined to provide my daughter with a better life, I earned a degree from the University of California, as mentioned earlier. And I used that, taken as well as my lessons learned from my mother, the skills developed advocating for my daughter, and the just the empirical tools that I gained through my science education. And I concentrated on improving my community and helping the most vulnerable in our society. As a staunch defender of women's reproductive rights, disability rights, and human rights, I'm a founding advisory board member, as mentioned, FemTruth Youth. As mentioned, is a nonprofit based here out of Danville for women's reproductive health and education and treatment, as well as the Natalie Project, which is a fund that advocates for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, specifically providing protections for the IDD community. It is important to note that I am the only candidate in this race that has been a lifelong Democrat. That's why I'm the only candidate endorsed by 10 Democratic clubs, and I am the only candidate in this race that is unwaveringly 100% pro-choice and pro-LGBTQIA rights, and that's why I'm endorsed by the California Women's List, the Honor PAC, and LPAC. As an executive committee member of the Sierra Club California and the San Francisco Bay chapter, I have been at the forefront of addressing climate change, and in this role led several Bay Area environmental groups and the Contra Costa Building and Construction Trades Council in developing policy to help workers transition from fossil fuel jobs to green jobs. I am the only candidate in this race that has signed the pledge to not accept more than $200 from the fossil fuel and big tech industry. In fact, I have accepted none. That's why I'm endorsed by Sustainable Rossmore, 350 Bay Area, Center for Biological Diversity, and the California Environmental Voters. And conversely, that is why my opponent in 2022 received a 24% from the California Environmental Justice Alliance, a 30% from Sierra Club, and a 37% from the California, I'm sorry, the first one was from the California Environmental Voters was a 37% in last year. And so as director and vice president of the Dublin San Ramon Services Water District, I contributed to my district receiving a District of Distinction Award by the Special District Leadership Foundation for our commitment to good governance and to ethical and sound operating practices. Currently, as a San Ramon City Councilwoman, where I was the first Latina, low socioeconomic person on the council, and the first council member to bring about an ad hoc climate action council, and just this past Tuesday successfully passed the formation of a climate action plan task force that will help inform and update our CAP that has not been updated since 2011, as well as help charter a prospective sustainability committee in our city. In this capacity, I have also been an ardent advocate for disability and senior rights, making our programs more accessible to our seniors and people living with disabilities, as well as our community, those who are don't have the means to pay for equipment and the cost of participating in activities. I've also been advocating for workforce housing to include more frontline essential workers who kept us afloat during the pandemic. My campaign for state senate is focused on supporting working families, tackling environmental challenges, protecting reproductive freedom, upholding common sense gun laws, advancing racial and social justice, addressing our housing crisis in collaboration with our cities, improving public safety by creating oversight committees, expanding psychosocial services for our police departments, identifying the social determinants of crime and poverty, and by making sure that we help low-resource communities thrive, and making sure that pre-K through college and healthcare is more accessible, affordable, and timely for all. That's why I'm endorsed by the largest teachers association, the California Teachers Association, San Lorenzo and Hayward Education's Association, the California Faculty Association, California Service Employees Association, National Union of Healthcare Workers, Healthcare for All California, and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Council 57. As the only corporate-free candidate who refuses accepting foreign and police money in this race, the only Latina elected in all of Supervisorial District 2 and 4. I need your help and support to bring about true diversity, equity, inclusion, and representation in Senate District 9 for typically marginalized communities, including people with disabilities. It is not a coincidence that there are only 3 Latinas in this meeting, with one being Afro-Latina. There is a reason my opponent received a D from NARAL in 2022. And as mentioned earlier, the abysmal scores from all of our major environmental groups. We need to be better allies to our youth, to our environment, and to communities of color, and not to the status quo that continues to stall progress and suppress our voices and forces us to work through systems that continually failed us. If you would like to donate or volunteer for my campaign, please go to Marisol4forca.com. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marisol. Looking for questions for Marisol tonight. I have a question about mental health has been discussed earlier is a real crucial issue, especially our youth with such a high percentage of thought about suicide, and it's very sad. What can the state do to help in that department, mental health care?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, we have to fund our schools better so that we can actually have more school psychologists on staff. Typically, there's only one per school, and they alternate days. Sometimes they're only there 2 to 3 days a week to service up to 500 students. And so you really have to wonder, how is it possible that one school psychologist could possibly meet the needs of one school with that kind of capacity? So we have to invest in education and invest in school psychologists, and also think creatively about how we can create safety nets for our students, especially our young people. When, for example, there's technology out there right now where students could come into the classroom and check in through their cell phones with their teachers, and let them know how they're doing that day and whether they're ready to start the day or do they need to speak with someone. But of course, that's limited by the fact, is there a school psychologist available? So it's the chicken and the egg problem. So we definitely have to invest in schools and maintain protected funds for our schools. I was an ardent supporter of Prop 15 back in 2020, which would have provided a lot of funding for our schools. But as you know, big money, got in the way and misled our community on that front. And in terms of mental health, other things that are really important, as you know, we had a very big problem here in San Ramon with our education, our school board, where we had the Moms of Liberty show up and really put some of our youth that are identified as LGBTQIA under a lot of duress with some of the comments that were being said. And if people really understood the rate of attempted suicide by our youth, our LGBT, specifically our male transgender youth, being over 50%, non-binary being about, I think it was in 40%, and then the transgender females being about 29%. And those are really staggering numbers for our young people to be really even contemplating suicide. And so I agree with you. We have an urgent need to improve mental health care and accessibility to it, especially.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Melanie, you've got a question?
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to ask you the same question. Would you support legislation to make fireworks illegal in California?
Absolutely.
And would you have time to maybe author that language?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very traumatizing for a lot of people, not just our pets, but people. Some people really, it's very, very traumatizing. Thankfully, in San Ramon, we don't have those fireworks, but we certainly, you know, we need to make that a mandate statewide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly.
Do we have any other questions for Marisol? All right, I guess that is it. It's getting late, so we appreciate you guys holding on and continuing to be a part of this meeting tonight. And we had a great number of topics that are, you know, very important as we look ahead to the national presidential election in November. So thank you very much. Go ahead, Brody. Do you have some other words?
No, I just I want to thank everyone who's renewed their membership for our club, and we are going to put a wonderful program together for you next month. I hope you can attend. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
And please join us next month when we have Congressman Swalwell. And enjoy the upcoming weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.